I'd like to welcome everybody to Minnesota Atheists 2007 Day of Reason. I am Steve Peterson, Chair of the Board of Minnesota Atheists. We're going to have a great event today, and we're using the rotunda of the Capitol because it's the center of our state government. When you cheer and make a lot of noise, those folks from up above, they're going to come along to the railing, and this is like Napoleon's tomb, where they're going to walk over and they're going to bow down to those of us who are we the people, who are here to give them a little bit of reason for the day. And these folks need it, but they love to see it. Outside on the front steps, there is the National Day of Prayer going on. So we're providing a little bit of counterbalance. We've had a few chats with them, and it was a very nice civil chat. We wish them the best on their day of prayer, and we're going to have a great time for the Day of Reason. Day of Reason, you need to cheer. Hooray for reason! And another tagline is, we're here for the absolute separation of state and church. Yeah! If that comes up in somebody's speech as they're going along, or they come in and bring it up, you want to make sure you give out a good loud cheer for them. And I think that you're pretty much ready to go. And I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who is George Kane, President of Minnesota Atheists. George?
And welcome, everyone. Outside, there's a celebration of the Day of Prayer. In response, we're celebrating inside the rotunda with a selection of historic readings that honor the separation of church and state. These opposing events reflect an objective division in American society, a divergence of values and outlook on the world. It's a characteristically American occasion that these two opposing groups would hold events for political expression peacefully and at the same place. Around the world and throughout history, religious diversity has usually resulted in civil discord, often in war. Religion defines political factions, each intent on assuming social and political dominance. Whatever specific issues focus their confrontation, the underlying objective is always for religion to stamp the national government with its identity. Everywhere that happens, wherever a nation assumes the identity of a religion, domestic tranquility then requires repression of minorities. Consequently, life is heavily burdened for Christians living in Muslim countries, for example, and for minorities of conscience wherever there is a state religion. The United States has been spared the worst political discord of religious diversity because it was founded at a peculiar moment of history. With religious wars in Europe fresh in their memory, and inspired by the deist movement that was spawned by the Enlightenment, our founding fathers established in law a separation of church and state. Article 6 establishes the constitutional law that no religious test shall be required as qualification for any office under the United States. The First Amendment states that Congress shall make no law with respecting an establishment of religion or restricting the free exercise thereof. The 14th Amendment extends these restrictions to all levels of government. These provisions guarantee that America will remain a secular nation, favoring no religion over any other, nor favoring religion over non-religion. No religion will be able to stamp its identity on government, ensuring a society in which all religions, all beliefs, all values, and all worldviews will be able to compete on their merits in an impartial marketplace. This event is organized by Minnesota Atheists, but separation of church and state is equally important to religious minorities, to secure their values and conscience from government coercion. Without question, more people have turned out for the Day of Prayer event outside than have joined us here inside the rotunda. Nevertheless, Minnesota Atheists has every confidence that reason and our rational humanist values will win in this fair and open marketplace and will prevail over superstition and myth. I want to personally acknowledge and thank everyone who's come to this event, whether to participate with a reading from this lectern or merely to observe. Your presence lets our legislators know, as they consider bills that come before them, that their constituents are vigilant for the appearance of religion in law. But the National Day of Prayer has been recognized by government proclamation in 49 states, despite its political divisiveness, breaching the restriction on government endorsement of religion. Our presence here today is a reminder to our government of the people, is a reminder to our government of the people of this annual breach. Steve.
Thank you, George. I'd like to bring up our next speaker, Minnesota Atheist member, Mike Haubrich. Mike?
Thank you, everybody. 400 years ago in the Jamestown colony, atheists had the choice of whether they were to be shot or hung, so I think we're very fortunate to be able to do this today. And so I respectfully submit President Jefferson's response to a minister who in 1808 had requested a proclamation for a National Day of Prayer. I consider the government of the United States as interdicted by the Constitution from intermeddling with religious institutions, their decisions, disciplines, or exercises. This results not only from the provision that no law shall be made respecting the establishment or free exercise of religion, but from that also which reserves to the states the powers not delegated to the United States. Certainly, no power to prescribe any religious exercise, nor to assume authority in religious discipline, has been delegated to the general government. It must then rest with the states as far as it can be in any human authority. But it is only proposed that I should recommend, not prescribe, a day of fasting and prayer. That is, that I should directly assume to the United States an authority over religious exercises which the Constitution has directly precluded them from. I do not believe it is for the interest of religion to invite the civil magistrate to direct its exercises, its disciplines, or its doctrines, nor of the religious societies that the general government should be invested with the power of effecting any uniformity of time or matter among them. Every religious society has the right to determine for itself the times for these exercises and the objects proper to them according to their own particular tenets, and this right can never be safer than in their own hands, where the Constitution has deposited it. I am aware the practice of my predecessors may be quoted, but I have ever believed that the example of state executives led to the assumption of that authority by the general government without the examination, which would have discovered that what might be a right in a state government was a violation of that right when assumed by another. And be this as it may, everyone must act according to the dictates of personal reason, and mine tells me that civil matters alone have been given to the President of the United States and no authority to direct the religious exercises of its constituents. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Ron Julian, who has some quotes. Ron?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I have 4 quotes here I'd like to read. Erecting the wall between separation of church and state is absolutely essential to free society. Thomas Jefferson. Who does not see that the same authority which can establish Christianity and exclusion of all other religions may establish with the same ease any particular sect of Christians, and exclusion of all other sects. James Madison. Leave the matter of religion to the family altar, the church, and the private school, supported entirely by private contributions. Keep the church and state forever separate. Ulysses S. Grant. The legitimate powers of government extend to such acts only as injurious to others. But it does me no injury for my neighbor to say there are 20 gods or no gods, if neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg. Thomas Jefferson. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Shirley Mall.
I would like to read a quotation by Matilda Joslyn Gage, written in her book, Woman, Church, and State, published in 1893. Looking forward, I see evidence of a conflict more severe than any yet fought by Reformation or science. A conflict that will shake the foundations of religious belief, tear into fragments and scatter to the winds the old dogmas upon which all forms of Christianity are based. It will not be the conflict of man with man upon rites and systems. It will not be the conflict of science upon church theories regarding creation and eternity. It will not be the light of biology illuminating the hypothesis of the resurrection of the body. But it will be the retaliation of one half of the church against those theological dogmas upon which the very existence of the church is based. In no other country has the conflict between natural and revealed rights been as pronounced as in the United States. And in this country, where the conflict first began, we shall see its full and final development. During the ages, no rebellion has been of like importance with that of woman against the tyranny of church and state. None has had its far-reaching effects. We note its beginning. Its progress will overthrow every existing form of these institutions. Its end will be a regenerated world.
I'd like to introduce our public relations person for Minnesota Atheists, August Berkshire.
Very often we hear the claim that the United States is a Christian nation or that it was founded on Christianity. Well, this issue came up early in the history of our country. Toward the end of George Washington's term, one of our diplomats named Joel Barlow was negotiating a treaty with Barbary. It's known as the Treaty of Tripoli. And in this treaty was included the phrase, "The government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion." So what happened to this treaty? Well, by the time it got to the Senate, Washington was no longer president and John Adams was president. Treaties have to be ratified by the Senate. It went before the Senate, the US Senate. It was read aloud. The Senate passed it unanimously and John Adams signed it. So the founders of this nation declared, and I'll read the quote again from Article 11 of the Treaty of Tripoli, "The government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion." Thank you.
I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Secretary of the Board for Minnesota Atheists, Matthew Richardson.
This is a quote from Paul Kurtz, who is the editor of Free Inquiry magazine. President George W. Bush called John Paul II a champion of human freedom. The U.S. media repeated the mantras that the Pope was the greatest person on earth in the 20th century, an extraordinary defender of human rights, and the moral authority of our time. Well, let's look at some of the examples of John Paul's idea of equal rights. John Paul II was an adamant opponent of women's rights, at least within the church, refusing their ordination. He opposed divorce, he opposed reproductive freedom, contraception, abortion, and artificial insemination. He was an implacable foe of the Death with Dignity movement and its advocacy for euthanasia and assisted suicide, which struggled to offer the incurably ill merciful release from their suffering and pain. The Catholic Church delights in human suffering. He insisted upon a celibate priesthood, though the Church did not practice celibacy during its first 1,000 years. He was also a strong foe of stem cell research on the arcane theological premise that the soul is implanted at the moment of conception or of the first division of cells in a petri dish, in spite of the consequent positive benefits that may accrue to humankind from stem cell research. On his many trips to Asia and Africa, he insisted that condoms not be used, and he argued for abstinence. These policies, no doubt, caused millions of deaths from AIDS and contributed to population growth in the Third World. Well into the 20th century, the Roman Catholic Church explicitly opposed democracy and human freedom in various parts of the world. Indeed, it still demands subservience from believers, defends its own authority from potentially infallible, and harshly discourages dissent about its theology. Moreover, it has consistently attempted to breach the separation of church and state wherever it has amassed enough power to do so, for example, seeking public funds for Catholic schools and hospitals. Many Roman Catholic hospitals deny reproductive and contraceptive services to women, even if they are urgently requested. What is so ominous in the United States for secular humanists is the alliance today between conservative Roman Catholics and evangelicals. Working together, they have emboldened to attack secularism and the First Amendment as never before. A whole line of right-wing conservative commentators in the media, such as Bill O'Reilly and Sean Hannity, venomously castigate secularism. Like Soviet apologists from an earlier era, they seek to rewrite history by claiming that the U.S. Constitution is rooted in monotheism and the Bible. They overlook the fact that the Constitution is a thoroughly secular document and that the First Amendment is the first clear statement on a national level of the separation of church and state.
Matthew also did a lot of work in putting this event together, so we should give him that. Matthew loves reason. And we do have our other Day of Reason sign up, and that's for the people up above, to make sure they can see us, who are standing behind us. I'd like to introduce the treasurer of Minnesota Atheists, Jack Caravella.
When John F. Kennedy was running for president in 1960, he was attacked on the basis of his religion. No Catholic had been elected president before, and his detractors claimed that he would follow the wishes of the Pope over the national interest. He responded to those charges with the following speech, made on September 12, 1960, to the Greater Houston Ministerial Association. As you listen to these excerpts, try to imagine any candidate for president today, Republican or Democrat, making such a strong statement in support of the separation of church and state. And I invite you to react as if you were listening to a current candidate's stump speech. Let him hear you upstairs. Now, this is what John F. Kennedy said, quote, "I believe in an America where the separation of church and state is absolute, where no Catholic prelate would tell the president, should he be Catholic, how to act, and no Protestant minister would tell his parishioners for whom to vote, where no church or church school is granted any public funds or political preference, and where no man is denied public office merely because his religion differs from the president who might appoint him or the people who might elect him. I believe in an America that is officially neither Catholic, Protestant, nor Jewish, where no public official either requests or accepts instructions on public policy from the Pope, the National Council of Churches, or any other ecclesiastical source, where no religious body seeks to impose its will, directly or indirectly, upon the general populace or the public acts of its officials. I believe in an America where religious intolerance will someday end, where all men in all churches are treated as equal, where every man has the same right to attend or not attend the church of his choice, where there is no Catholic vote, no anti-Catholic vote, no block voting of any kind, and where Catholics, Protestants, and Jews at both the lay and pastoral level will refrain from those attitudes of disdain and division which have so often marred their works in the past, and promote instead the American ideal of brotherhood. That is the kind of America in which I believe, and it represents the kind of presidency in which I believe, a great office that must neither be humbled by making it the instrument of any one religious group, nor tarnished by arbitrarily withholding its occupancy from the members of any one religious group. I believe in a president whose religious views are his own private affair, neither imposed by him upon the nation or imposed by the nation upon him as a condition to holding that office. I would not look with favor upon a president working to subvert the First Amendment's guarantees of religious liberty, nor would our system of checks and balances permit him to do so. And neither do I look with favor upon those who would work to subvert Article 6 of the Constitution by requiring a religious test, even by indirection, for it. I want a chief executive whose public acts are responsible to all groups and obligated to none, who can attend any ceremony, service, or dinner his office may appropriately require of him, and whose fulfillment of his presidential oath is not limited or conditioned by any religious oath, ritual, or obligation. I ask you today to follow in that tradition, to judge me, John F. Kennedy, on the basis of my record of 14 years in Congress, on my declared stands against an ambassador to the Vatican, against unconstitutional aid to parochial schools, and against any boycott of the public schools. Whatever issue may come before me as president, on birth control, divorce, censorship, gambling, or any other subject, I will make my decision in accordance with these views, in accordance with what my conscience tells me to be the national interest, and without regard to outside religious pressures or dictates, and no power or threat of punishment could cause me to decide otherwise. But if the time should ever come, and I do not concede any conflict to be even remotely possible, when my office would require me to either violate my conscience or violate the national interest, then I would resign the office, and I hope any conscientious public servant would do the same. Now that's what JFK said in September 1960. It's nearly 47 years later. Today, we have an ambassador to the Vatican. The first was appointed by Ronald Reagan in 1984. We have President Bush's faith-based initiative, an executive order that established unconstitutional government aid to religious institutions. And we have a political landscape where candidates openly seek the approval of organized religions, and religious institutions try to dictate how their members should vote. We're here today to help reverse this dangerous trend of undermining our Constitution. And I encourage all of you to stay informed and contact your elected representatives on these and the many other issues that threaten secular society. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jack. Next we have Franklin Ruse. Franklin? I'm sorry. How about if I get it correct? Frederick Ruse. I'm sorry, Frederick.
In his A Defense of the Constitutions of Government of the United States of America, closer, 1787 to 1788, John Adams wrote, "The United States of America have exhibited perhaps the first example of governments erected on the simple principles of nature, and if men are now sufficiently enlightened to disabuse themselves of artifice, imposture, hypocrisy, and superstition, they will consider this event as an era in their history. Although the detail of the formation of the American governments is at present little known or regarded either in Europe or in America, it may hereafter become an object of curiosity. It will never be pretended that any persons employed in that service had interviews with the gods or were in any degree under the influence of heaven more than those that work upon ships or houses or laboring in merchandise or agriculture. It will forever be acknowledged that these governments were contrived merely by the use of reason and the senses. 13 governments of the original states, thus founded on the natural authority of the people alone, without a pretense of miracle or mystery, and which are destined to spread over the northern part of that whole quarter of the globe, are a great point gained in favor of the rights of mankind."
This mic setup is a anti-tall person setup because somebody my height is just perfect, but it's not adjustable to accommodate. Apparently it's gotten worn out over the years. I'd like to introduce Jim Barry.
Thank you, Steve. It's good to be here again. I had not originally thought I was going to be able to make it, so I don't have prepared remarks. I'm just going to vamp. Bear with me. There's been a lot of talk about the Constitution today, and it bears repeating one more time. Nothing in the Constitution says anything about religious belief in terms of being a citizen, in terms of being a representative, or any part of the government whatsoever. There's a big lie going on, been going on for the past 30, 40, 50 years about this country and the Constitution being founded on the Bible and religious beliefs. Well, I'm here to tell you, it ain't necessarily so. One of the arguments against ratifying the Constitution was the fact that there were no religious references. Nothing about allegiance to a God, nothing about allegiance to his son Jesus. Up until the end of the 19th century, there was a God in the Constitution party looking to amend the Constitution to put in religious language. It hasn't happened, at least not officially. We're dealing with the undertow, so to speak. This is also a moment of great opportunity, though, no matter, in spite of the incredible setbacks we've had over the last 10 years under you-know-who. People like Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens are bringing atheism and free thought into the public consciousness in a way that hasn't been in over 100 years. This is a good time for us to keep our message going. Carl Sagan said a long time ago that science is a candle in the dark. And you know what? There's no conflict between science and free thought, science and atheism. We are also a candle. The darkness is still out there, but it is getting a little less dark. Those who support separation, those who work for separation, we've got tons and tons and tons of work to do and miles to go, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
I think when we think of Jim Barry, that's somebody who lives that ability to understand what our Constitution means. That's what he had in mind to say what he got here. He put it together off the top of his head, and we appreciated it. Our last speaker is the Associate President of Minnesota Atheists and the voice of our Air America ads, of which we advertise this event, Cynthia Egley.
I think this was built for me. Separation of church and state is... It is the single most important principle for the preservation of constitutional law in our country. Since the Constitution was written, there has been an unceasing stream of voices claiming that the Founding Fathers accidentally left God out of it, and it needs to be fixed. On the contrary, the Constitution was carefully and intentionally written that way. We grow up in an environment where Girl and Boy Scouts say they make a pledge to serve my God and my country. Many of us grew up reciting the Pledge of Allegiance with the words "under God" interpolated between one nation and indivisible, an interesting spot to put it. Our money says, "In God we trust." Is it really surprising that so many believe that God should be placed above the law of the land? For the deeply religious person, God must have a higher claim on the believer's loyalty than any government. That is the hazard that the wall of separation is intended to avert. If God is superior to the Constitution, if our leaders believe they know what God wants them to do, then they can justify overriding any constitutional principle. How do we know what God wants, what God's word is? There are and have been a lot of people claiming a direct line to God, including the Pope, the Reverend Jim Jones, numerous persons who have been diagnosed as schizophrenic, and quite a few in the national administration at this time. If we aren't satisfied with taking some person's word for it, we will be directed to a holy book, such as the Bible. Well, how about the Quran? How about the Kama Sutra? How do we decide? If God is placed above the Constitution, then whoever has the most power decides. This may be the numbers of people who vote, or it may be the people who have the most money, but it is more likely to be those who are willing to do whatever it takes to gain power. These are people who define liberty and freedom as the right to be born again. They consider themselves to be super patriots. Anyone who wants to worship Jesus Christ in another way is not included, let alone Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, pantheists, Wiccans, and many others. Atheists, agnostics, humanists, freethinkers, and secularists of any kind don't have a chance. Suddenly, some people are more citizenly than other citizens, reminiscent of Orwell's concept that some are more equal than others. Each incursion of religion into the government moves us further in that direction. If "In God We Trust" is on our money, then we can put God in the pledge. If we have God in the pledge, we can have a national day of prayer. If we can have a national day of prayer, we can fund our social services through religious organizations while allowing them the freedom to discriminate against people in employment and to use their time to proselytize their beneficiaries. If we give government money to religious organizations, then we can teach religion in our schools. And if we can teach religion in our schools, we can redefine science to be something that is a matter of opinion. And the most equal opinion is creationism. Each small step is used to justify the next. How far will we let it go? Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote that when the trains in communist Russia kept breaking down, the Communist Party decided that the engineers just weren't being communist enough to fix they needed to fix the trains, they just didn't have any spare parts. But if they were communist enough, they certainly could have done it. So he had them sent off to the Gulag. For some reasons, the trains still didn't work. That's the price of replacing reason with ideology. How long will our world leadership last if we gut our programs in science and technology to make them more biblical. And all of our outstanding minds and leading technology companies go elsewhere. Will the church that runs the government at that time decide that we are failing because our scientists are not biblical enough? We are not there yet, but each small step in that direction gets us closer. We must pay attention and respond, or we will get there eventually. We have so much to lose if we replace science with ancient religious texts. We have so much to lose if we replace reason with prayer. And we have so much to lose if we allow the wall of separation to fail. We must not allow that to happen. Our government must remain exclusively secular, so that all of us can worship or not worship as we choose. Our government must make its decisions based on reason and scientific evidence, so that all of us can benefit from solutions to our issues that actually work. And most of all, our government must remain true to the constitutional principles that use the separation of powers and the Bill of Rights to guarantee that we can all live in freedom. Thank you.
Just a couple of wind-ups of the folks who all spoke. If right when we conclude, if you could just hang on here for just a few moments. The person who is the MC for the National Day of Prayer event on the Capitol, we had chatted earlier. He's a very nice man, and 12:45 they're having their prayer for the legislators, and I'm sure there's a number of them out there, and they're also including us in that prayer. So we're being watched over, and I thank them for it. But you know, there's two things we do when we come to this Capitol. One, August and I, if we come here, or somebody else on behalf of Minnesota Atheists, we bring a get out of hell free card. Of course, they're not worried about going to hell because atheists are talking to us. They're worried about some of their own constituents. But the other thing is I always bring a copy of the Constitution. This is the bicentennial pocket copy. This is our government, and this is on our side. It makes no difference on the number of people that recognize one side because they think there's political votes there, or maybe they sincerely have a belief there, or maybe don't recognize us. But this Constitution, and there's a phrase in it that was specifically put in, it is the supreme law of the land. That phrase was put in the body of the Constitution specifically because there is not a religious law of the land that is supreme. This is the law of the land, and we're here to remind them it's a secular document. I'd really like to thank everybody for coming, and one more hand for Day of Reason.